thanks for showing up.
All right.
Beautiful flowers.
Welcome. So we'll take questions because this is your time.
Hello, I'm Kirsten. I'm from theonering.net. So of course I have a Middle-earth-centric question for you. Back when
I saw a lot of probably your friends maybe last
I was
night.
there last night, it was great. Everybody was very, very excited, and
I should have probably had you guys sing it with me. It would have gone better. Then you probably know the song better than I did. Anyway,
well,
it was
really, really nice of you to do that. People were really blown away. It was a very generous gesture.
well, it was fun.
So, I wanted to ask you, back when Peter Jackson and the gang first started talking seriously about making the Hobbit movies,
Yeah.
it was said that the second one was going to be maybe a kind of bridge movie. So that it
I
would
heard those
include,
rumors.
yeah, events between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. And Peter Jackson had said that a big part of that might be tales of Aragorn's time as Strider.
Did he say that?
Yeah, he said that in an interview in 2006, and that we'd like to revisit with you the character and tell tales of the guarding the borders of the Shire. And I wondered, you know, if you would have liked that to have happened, if you
It
attempted.
sounds like a lot of fun, but I never heard from Peter, so it must have been an idea
Yeah,
that they
obviously it
discarded.
all went a different way. Are you tempted to go and visit New Zealand now? And
I go back now and then. I have friends there, and I enjoy going back. Beautiful country, as you know. You've probably been there, right? So, and I'm like you. I'm looking forward to seeing how they've adapted The Hobbit. You know what they've done. It's true that there is a 60-something. I don't remember how many years. 60-something years between the end of The Hobbit and the start of The Lord of the Rings. So it would have been. Potentially could have done your story that included some more of the characters from Lord of the Rings, the actors and their characters, but didn't happen. Would have been fun. I enjoy going back there, and as I say, I'm looking forward to it. Last night was especially fun because it's been, time has passed. It's been a decade now. And I remember it reminded me the enthusiasm, for those of maybe most of you who weren't there. These are people who had seen not just the regular theatrical versions yesterday, but saw all three movies, the extended versions, which each extended version is, some 3.5 hours long. So they were there all day, some of them in costume, and all very knowledgeable, all having seen the movies many times. And I drove here, got here last night, got here late, and I knew they were showing the movie, so came down and introduced the third one as a surprise. And the reaction from those people when I walked in was amazing. And it reminded me of when we were releasing those movies, particularly the last one, The Return of the King. There was such, for example, the very last time that I've been part of introducing or screening of The Return of the King was in Oslo, Norway in December of 2003. And I have to say that as crazy as the people were last night, those people were, I don't know if anybody's as crazy as that. Because the Norwegians, Tolkien's work is based on, heavily draws on Nordic mythology and literature. And so I did something similar there. We did our press, and then the next day they were going to show, Thursday the other day, in the movie theaters, and they were going to show The Return of the King. And in one of the larger theaters, nicer theaters in Oslo, people had been lining up for a month, all in costume. Elves, hobbits, orcs, dwarves, wizards, fair maidens, all kinds of stuff, and with their weapons, with their props, for a month. And this is winter in Oslo, snow, and people were on the sidewalk for a month in sleeping bags, people bringing them soup and coffee and internet connection and first aid and psychiatric counseling. And you know, I talked to some of those people afterwards. Some of them got divorced as a result of, you know, really, you know, a lot of people, their relationships broke up. It was a pretty big ordeal for them. And so when I walked in there, and they didn't know either, well, there was an introduction by the theater person, or the distributor, didn't know what, and the lights went down, and then I sort of snuck out. And the lights came up, and they completely melted down. And it was, I mean, I was shocked. I've never seen anything like it. It was a theater, you know, maybe twice as big as this one, or more. And every single person was a wizard, was an elf, was a dwarf. And they were screaming, and waving their axes and their staffs and crying. And I was like, well, I think also the fact that they'd been lying in the snow for a month was a big release. But anyway, last night was akin to that. There was something about it. And I suddenly felt, I have to say, very, very nervous. And I referred to a song and sang. I was so nervous I couldn't sing it properly. But anyway, it was very nice. Sorry to go on so much about it, but it was very nice, and it was amazing to be in that theater for the first time. I mean, it's a great space, and I feel, you know, very fortunate to be here. And I think places like this, you know, Boston's very lucky to have the Coolidge Theater, and these places really need to be preserved and encouraged. And it's not just about going and seeing a movie. There's something to it that has to do with community. You know, people, you could feel it last night. People in a theater celebrating the art of movie making, not just celebrating the Lord of the Rings and the idea of different kinds of people coming together. You know, it's all those things. It was a nice moment.
I believe it's on YouTube. If you want to see your...
Oh God.
That's what I've heard.
Well, maybe I'll.
Okay. So I'm going to try and spread it out, but yeah. So just come up, introduce yourself and help.
Jean Lucas from ComeToCinema.com.
Hello.
And, hello. I would just like to ask you if you'd like to talk a little bit about your work with Bob Anderson, the British Swordmaster that just passed away earlier this year.
Well, he's one of my heroes. He was a great man, and you know, I mean, legendary for especially for movie geeks, like the people I consider myself one, and I was happy to be amongst them last night. And I probably should have talked about Bob last night, but I like him. I mean, he was a gentleman. He was very strict. He was very, very good at what he did, and but above all, I liked him because he was a gentleman. He was a kind, very kind person. You know, he expected a lot from himself and he expected a lot from others. I was lucky to work with him on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and in the last movie he worked on, which was A la Triste, which was a Spanish movie set in the 17th century. I convinced him to come out of retirement because I asked the director, Agustin Diaz-Llanes, who he was going to use as a sword master, because it was important to get it right. And he said, well, you know, Spain, we've made a lot of great movies, but we don't have a history of, you know, like Hollywood does, or England, or France, of making these sorts of period movies, you know, with lots of sword fighting. We haven't had a history of that in our cinema industry. And so there aren't, you know, we have good fencers and fencing masters, but it's a different kind of thing. It's a different art form to do it for the movies, for the camera. And I said, well, you know, Bob Anderson is, and he goes, yeah, of course. I said, what if he did it? Would you be open to it? You know, if he wanted to do it, he said, that would be incredible. So with the blessing of the director, I asked Bob, and Bob said, no, I'm retired. He'd actually left the production of the sequel, or one of the sequels, I don't know how many they've made, it was Zorro, because he'd done the first one, I guess it was the second one, the first one, and he'd been a little annoyed that he wasn't allowed to do it the way he wanted, you know, more realistically, I think. And, you know, like a lot of movies involve swordplay, there's a lot of modern fighting that's imposed on period pieces, that drive someone crazy. It's ridiculous, and he wants it to be historically accurate. And so Zorro too, there was so much kung fu stuff in it that he just kept complaining. Whatever, they didn't see eye to eye, and he left, which is very unusual for him. He's a very professional person. He said, "That's it. I had it. The way movies are made." I said, "Well, Bob, let me tell you the story." He goes, "All right, man." And so I told him the story, and he said, "Now, this is Rapier and Dagger." And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "17th century," and then discourse about swords and sword play, sword fighting, and it's always interesting to hear him go on about that. And he said, "Do you think they'd let me do it realistically?" I said, "I think that's what the director wants, but he doesn't know who to go to." He said, "Well, if I can do it realistically, that would be great." So he said yes, and came out of retirement. And he came to Spain, and the crew loved him. You know, this crazy old English guy that didn't really speak any English, but they worshipped him. And the crew and he and the director were all crying the day he left. It was amazing. It was amazing. And he was not well at that time either. You know, a lot of the time he had to be sitting. You know, all the rehearsals he was sitting down rather than showing us with the sword and instructing us. And it was an amazing person to work with. There was one, I'll be very brief, but there was well, Lord of the Rings fan probably knows this story, but there was an incident in practice where, you know, I was rehearsing before we started shooting this Spanish movie, and there was a few guys that were attacking my character in the scene, backing me into a corner. And some of these were competitive fencers. One who was particularly good, who'd been enlisted to play one of these guys, the way Bob had been when he started. You know, I think we got 4th place in the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki for England. He was a competitive fencer who got his start. Someone gave him a job to play opponents in the movies of Errol Flynn. So that's how he started his movie acting, or his sword play career in the movies. Sword master. Anyway, so one of these guys was very good, and Bob said, he stopped the rehearsal, and guys were attacking me. He said, "Oh, hang on a second." And from a seated position, he'd noticed some detail. And he said to the guy, the best one, the most skillful one, he says, "Ask him, you know, to the translator, if he'd be willing to change his grip, or is he happy with his grip?" And the guy said, translated back, "Yeah, I'm quite happy with it. Why?" And he said, "Well, would you consider adjusting it just a few millimeters, you know, just kind of a quarter inch?" And he said, "Well, with all due respect, you know, it served me quite well, this particular way of holding my weapon for many years. I'm quite a successful fencer," or something like that. And Bob said, "Very well, okay." Ask him to come over, so he had the guy come over, and Bob's sitting in the chair. And he says, "Give me a sword." And then he sits there and he goes, he would get into an on guard position. And the guy sort of smiled. He goes, "Okay." He goes, "Are you ready?" And he goes, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Are you really ready?" He goes, "Yeah." And then Bob, he almost didn't see his hand move. It was just a little flick, and the guy's sword was flying across the room. And it was like a quick moment. Somebody told me, I said, "Well, that's like out of the movies, you know, some Zen Yoda moment, you know. How did that guy do that?" And then the guy, of course, he was a little bit flustered and embarrassed, and he goes, "Well, go get your weapon. You probably weren't ready. Go get it and get ready again." And he had the guy stand there, and he says, "Are you ready?" And the guy, now the guy's pride had been touched, and everybody's watching him. And so he got really ready. And Bob did the same thing. I don't know how he did it. The guy's sword flew out of his hand again. And then he asked the translator, he said, "Ask him if he would consider changing his grip." And the guy said, "Yes, sir." So that was Bob. Legend.
Hi, Chris Jensen from Big Boston. Hi. So just earlier this week, I was with a friend, we were watching The Prophecy, and then there were audible gasps when you came out. I didn't know he was in this. Same thing happened 2 hours later. We watched Carlito's Way, which happened to be the same thing, audible gasps. Oh my God, I didn't know he was in this. And it was a positive thing. We paid closer attention to the performances and noticed things about how your character fit into the film in ways they may not have if they didn't know who you were. And so my question is, with the Coolidge Awards, they're showing some movies from the last 10 years, Eastern Promises, Lord of the Rings. How does getting an award that reflects your entire body of work make you reflect on days when you were in more supporting character roles?
Well, it would have been interesting to show those. I don't know if there will be in the clips that they show tonight. I'm hard to say. But I really enjoyed working on those movies. You know, learned a lot. You know, you can learn a lot on every movie if you want to. And playing Laline in Carlito's Way was a really interesting experience. You know, I did a lot of research and got really ready, as I usually do. And really liked it. I really enjoyed working with Al Pacino a lot. I think that the reason they didn't show movies like that, I mean, they can only show so many this week, but because I only have one scene, I suppose, or in the prophecy I only have a couple of scenes, 2 or 3 scenes. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, when you bring that up, it makes me think, what year was that? And then I realized, I have been doing this for quite a while. And I'm usually surprised when I stop to think about how long it's been. You know what I mean? And when you're given an honor like this one, you're forced to think about that a little bit. And it's like, well, I guess, well, maybe that's a human thing. You know, I guess I'm older than I think. I've been doing this longer than I thought I had been. Don't know if I'll be able to play Peter Pan. But I feel like Peter Pan, I suppose. Yeah, there's something about the movies in the same sense that, you know, children playing, you know. There's something new about it. There's something about always starting over, always being a beginner. If you want to look at it that way, you know, you can calcify, you can say, this is what I do well, as a director, as an actor, as a producer. I tell these kinds of stories, I play these kind of characters, I'm the best at it, I kind of do variations on it, but I'm doing this. I like to do things where it's like, whoa, how are we going to do that? You know what I mean? How am I going to learn to be that person? That's what I like, and you know, when I look back at roles like the ones you mentioned, you know, they're full of obstacles. Well, how do you do that? You know, what's a guy like that's that way, that's in a wheelchair, what's his background? How did he get there? When did he come to New York from Puerto Rico? And how much of an accent does he have? And so forth. Lucifer. Well, it's hard to do much research on the guy, you know. I mean, there's not a lot of pictures. You know, I've met some people that I would have thought, well, I recorded that person's voice, that's probably close to it. No, I mean, you use your imagination, and it's always, it's not starting from square one, but in some sense, there's a little bit of that, because although I approach it the same way, you know, I was asking myself what happened between birth and page 1 of the script, you know, whatever's not in the script as far as references to the character's past and so forth. Gotta make it up. And I like to. I mean, you don't have to. That's what I like to do, because it's part of that make-believe, play acting. It's a very, you know, childish activity that you refine as you go on as an adult actor. For me to feel comfortable, I really have to believe it as much as I did when I was a little kid, pretending to be a Viking or an athlete that's, you know, winning the game in the last seconds or something like that. I need to believe that it's completely real, so I can just be comfortable. I also know from experience that the more I believe it, the more chance there is that you're going to believe it. But that's the game, that's the job. I like it.
Hi, I'm Ashley Stiller from the Brookline Cab. So I wanted to ask you, which are you more passionate about? Is it your music or your acting? Something we don't know about? And what is your biggest passion?
Well, in terms of art, you mean?
Yeah.
I think they're all related, you know. I've been asked this question before, and I apologize to those who've heard maybe my answer to it, but I essentially think that they're all related, you know, they're all branches of the same tree, so to speak. You know, they all have to do with same as play acting as a kid. You know, there are artistic activities have to do with paying attention, trying to understand where you're paying attention to, filtering it, as you do, thinking about it, and then trying to recall it, trying to remember it, maybe express what it is you think you saw or felt, you know, or heard. And, you know, I think that just being an artist in general is what everybody does it on some level, I think, whether they realize it or not. It's how you listen to somebody in a conversation, or you're paying for something at the store, you know, not thinking, oh, life is short, I'm going to die someday, I should treat everybody well. No, you know, sometimes you're rude or whatever, the waiter. But it's really about, you make the choice in how you look at someone, how you listen, how you answer. You're not going to have to be some sort of saint, but time is short, and you're not going to get that moment back with that cashier. Even if that cashier is annoying, how do you deal with that? Are you going to sink to that level, or did you misbehave, or should you go back and apologize? How you talk to somebody, how you watch a movie, how you walk down the street and observe what you see, how you treat your kids, how you treat your dog, how you look at, I don't know, how am I looking at you guys? You know, now I sort of be specific on how many cameras are there, what kind of cameras are there, things that, I don't know, I suppose like secret agents are trained to walk in a room and then they go out 30 seconds later and they can tell you how many people, what they were wearing. At least in the movies, that's what it seems to do. Secret agents do that, but most of the time people don't do that. Why should they, I guess? I don't know. It's just a question of paying attention. And that's my way of paying attention and communicating with the world I'm in.
Hi, Mike Sullivan from The Independent.
Hey.
Related to your previous answer to that gentleman's question about doing different things and different, but you've worked with a couple of directors on several movies, obviously Lord of the Rings, with David Cronenberg most recently.
Mm-hmm.
Does he, working with him, have a similar attitude towards doing different stories, even though you guys have worked together in the past, but now you're doing a different character and a different story? That a draw to work with the same director but on a different project?
Not all directors, but with him certainly, because I know that he's going to be ready. I know first of all that he loves what he does, and that's contagious. You know, when you're preparing, you know, you can talk to him as much as you want. He's open to that. He likes preparing the movie. He likes shooting it. Maybe he gets tired promoting it sometimes, but he loves movie making. Like I like telling stories in the movies as well. And you know, he found out pretty early on that I prepare thoroughly, and that I show up on time, and that I listen to him. And he realized, I think early on, that he was comfortable working with me. You know, that I was good to have on his side. Maybe, I don't know, that I'm reliable. I mean, there's no better thing, as far as I'm concerned, in my profession. And I would say that no matter what line of work I was in, than to be called reliable. Sounds a little boring, but you know, that someone can count on you to do a job well, or as the best you can. That's you know, that's what I strive for, and I think that's what he strives for as a director. I'm comfortable with him because I know that he's prepared, and I know he's going to do a good job at the set. You know, I mean, life is short, and it's better to have fun. Sometimes a good movie can be made where people have a horrible time on the shoot, a lot of yelling, unfairness and so forth, but it's not worth it. No matter how good the script is, it's not worth it as far as I'm concerned. That's what I've learned, and if I have any choice in the matter, I'd rather work with ladies and gentlemen, you know, with people who treat people well, and there's not a lot of yelling, and it's professional. It can be fun, it can be goofy, you know, and all that, but I like working with him. I know that I'm getting into something that's going to be, I'm going to learn, I'm going to have fun, and, which I can't say for that many directors, there's a pretty well I mean, there's a guarantee of quality. You know, I know that the finished movie is going to be worth watching. And you can't say that about too many directors. I'm surprised that it takes him so much effort to get his movies financed, up and running. You know, the last one, Dangerous Method, that I worked on with him, produced by Jeremy Thomas, great producer who is as valuable as the Coolidge theaters like this are, because he's a rarity. Jeremy Thomas is a really old-fashioned, creative producer. There just aren't hardly any left. You know, it's one thing to buy up quality movies and promote the hell out of them, but that's not the same thing. To make complicated, unusual, original stories, to get them made it's more and more difficult. And Jeremy Thomas is someone like that. Well, on David's last movie, 4 years has gone by, or more, since Easter Promises has come out. It takes him that long to get it together. And I don't understand it, because someone who always shoots his movies efficiently, you know, they finish on time or before time in terms of schedule. They're always on budget or under budget. And you end up with an interesting movie. I mean, what more can you ask for from a business standpoint, from a creative producer standpoint? You know, so it surprises me. I think it's because he doesn't look back. I mean, yes, each time, you know, referring to your question, I know that you're going to get someone who knows a lot, more than any director alive, about the technical aspects of filmmaking and how to work with actors, all that kind of stuff. Knows how to tell a story. And I can get along with people. But he doesn't look back in the sense of, I don't think he seems in any way he feels trapped by his persona or his resume. You know, I find that directors who have been around as long as he has been, and who are respected, most times they seem to sort of get stale, or they tend to play it safe, or they tend to repeat themselves. They seem to buy into what the public perception of them or their work is, or something, I don't know, or they just lose interest, and it's just like a job. And Cronenberg still likes what he does, and he's still testing himself. So I think it takes people a year or so to kind of get what he really did. Even if they appreciate it, and you watch his movie a second time or a third time, it just gets better, and you see more layers. Most movies, almost all movies, you watch them a second time, even if they won the Oscar last year, or were nominated, maybe, which David has never been, amazingly. And you watch them again, and you kind of, maybe not quite as interesting as I thought it was. And then each time, each subsequent viewing, if you care to see it again, you find more fault with it. With David, it's the other way around, I think. I think it's like a great, you know, it's like any great performance by an actor, or a director, or a cinematographer. When it's done really well, it looks very easy, you know, and I think his movies look easy. They seem simple. It's only when you really pay attention to them, or watch them a second or a third time, when you really think about it, compared to other movies. It takes time to appreciate how detailed his work is, you know, how good it is. He makes it look easy, but it's not. So I think that's why people, I don't know, they go, well, what is he doing now? Why does he want to do a movie about Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud? It's crazy, you know, and then he does it. Jeremy Thomas, you know, was struggling the first half of the production. They still didn't have all the money. It's insane, you know. And then you have other directors that shoot a movie every year if they want to. You know. Who knows?
I just want to make sure if there's anyone in the balcony that has a question, not anyone who does. Okay, any other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michaela Smith from Boston University Daily Press. As we identified last night at the Academy Awards, The Lord of the Rings left an indelible imprint on both 21st century cinema and the people of the 21st century. For you as an actor, is this artistic sort of a realization of success, or is there something else? Why do you
The Lord of the Rings, a really realization of success for that movie, or for me?
For you as an actor, to have that imprint on you.
Well, for me, it was great. It was, in terms of I mean, I wouldn't have worked with Cronenberg, I probably wouldn't be in this theater right now, I don't think. You know, talking to you about the Coolidge Award, maybe it wouldn't have happened, probably wouldn't have happened. If not for the success of Lord of the Rings, it gave me more opportunities, and that's what you do with it, you know. I do think that the Lord of the Rings, even though certain, you know, the perception of quality, perceived quality of some of the special effects, which is the nature of that, technically, won't hold up. It's just the way it is. There's a lot of things that people, maybe even in The Hobbit, I don't know, that they'll do better. You know, technology improves and so forth. I think that the essential thing that got to people was what the books were about, what the book, you know, The Lord of the Rings was about, was, you know, that it was profound. You know, there was something about all these different races coming together, working together. There was something about compassion. It was very profound as a story. There have been a lot of spin-offs, as always happens when something's successful, when people try to copy it, whether it be the Harry Potter series or any number of, you know, sword fighting kinds of stories, whether it be, what was the name of the movie with Ridley Scott made, with the Crusades, Heaven, what? Yeah, you know, and you can see just the weapons and certain things that were, you know, I mean, there's many movies that have been spawned, you know, or, you know, that were made because the Lord of the Rings was so successful. But, you know, and as much as, I mean, the fans of Harry Potter are every bit as devoted as the Lord of the Rings fans, and I'm sure there's a lot of crossover there. But, you know, as good as some of those movies were, and I thought that the one, I haven't seen all of them, but I liked what Alfonso Cuarón did, for example. I thought there was something more there, something grittier. I don't know if it was the second one or the third one, yeah. But they're not as profound, you know, in terms of literature, in terms of originality, in terms of the foundations, you know, what the Lord of the Rings is about, in terms of mythology, literature. The scope, you know, is just, there's a lot more to it. So those movies, you know, that Peter Jackson made, because of what the foundation is, Tolkien, there's something that's going to last, you know, no matter how maybe some of our acting or some of the special effects or the cinematography maybe won't age, which is just the nature of the business, you know. It's the way it is, the technology. I think that the stories hold up and always will hold up on some level. There's, you know, I mean, I could feel that in some sense from the people. So why are all these people here tonight? You know, I thought when I was on the stage last night, why are they so, it's more than just, you know, I love Legolas or something, you know. In some cases, maybe it's only that. No, but I think that there's something very profound about that, about those stories, and thought-provoking. They could have used some editing, but, you know, so could the Bible, but who's going to be the person that's going to edit the Bible, you know? So it is what it is. It's a unique thing, you know. I mean, just like the books themselves. Back when Tolkien, in 1954, 1955, when those 3 parts of Lord of the Rings were published in England and other places, there weren't sections in bookstores that were fantasy. There wasn't a fantasy. There really wasn't. That genre hardly existed, really. You know, I mean, he created something, and Peter Jackson, in some sense, reinvented that, you know, in the movies. Brought that to the movie.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions.
I'll try to be shorter with my answers. Maybe you can see 3
We
in.
might have 3.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bozek. I'm a freelance writer. I'm a big fan, but my question is, besides the award ceremony, is there anything else here in Boston that you particularly enjoy doing, or that you're planning to do?
Well, I have to drive back to northern New York in the morning, so I'm probably not going to get a chance this time. But I've enjoyed going to museums and walking around. I like Boston, and I know it's a big sports town, and I like sports. I've never been to Fenway. I'd like to go sometime and see a game there. I like teams that people in Boston don't like. The Mets. I like the Mets. I don't like the Rangers. I'm sorry you guys lost to the Rangers last night. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. I guess the worst offense is being a Mets fan, I suppose. I'm very sorry. You guys did beat the Knicks. I like the Knicks. You beat them last night. No, I mean...
I'm not a Boston sports fan, I'm a Coolidge fan.
Yeah, really. There's so much for the short answer.
Okay, 2 more questions?
There's a lot of Boston athletes that I've liked.
No.
Okay. Havlicek, Larry Bird, Bobby Orr.
Hi, I'm Anthony Maloney from Brookline Hub website. Just going off that last question, would you ever consider making any, like, I know you're a bit of a soccer fan, but would you ever consider making like some sort of like a sports-related movie or soccer maybe with fans?
You mean acting in one?
Yeah.
I'm probably getting a little long in the tooth, but I'd be game. I like to play. I don't know. I hadn't really thought of it. At this point, it'd probably be, unless it's some story about some guy coming out of retirement and shocking everyone, I'd probably have to direct it or something. So, no, I'd be open to it. I like good stories. It doesn't really matter what the setting is or what the story, what the background is.
Peter?
Peter from Boston. You mentioned directing. Do you intend to direct this one?
I might like to try that at some point. I do like everything that goes into movie making, and I like actors, which is a plus. I find that there's that many directors that I'm confident like actors or see them as more than just tools. But I'd like to try it sometime. One more quick one.
Monica Castillo from Big Boston. Where would you like to see your career go from the award on? Pursue more acting or maybe more writing?
I don't know. Just have to see what happens tomorrow. I never really had a career plan. If I do this, that, and the other, maybe I'll get the Coolidge Award. I want to work with that director. I want to, but I'm serious. Or I will accept this role so that I can get a certain amount of attention. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I just like to, whether it's doing it by photographing or acting or editing books that others write or writing poems or stories. Making movies, being in plays. I just like stories. I like telling stories, and I think the stories that we tell about ourselves are who we are. The stories that we tell about other people are who we really are. That's how we, in an ongoing manner, whether we're conscious of it or not, that's how we deal with the puzzling fact that we're here. The unknown reasons for that. I don't know. What are you going to do? You're going to tell a story. You're going to try to explain it to yourself and to others. You're going to be interested in how others try to explain it to you, and we'll never know really why we're here, no matter what's written down or what some wise person or some holy person tells you. You're never going to know why you're here or why this or that happened. But it's worth, it's interesting. It's fun to try to find out. It's really what I'm doing, and I think I'm doing. Or maybe that's just a story I'm telling you.
I think that's all the time we have. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate the support of the Coolidge and you guys.
Thank you all for your time, and thanks to the Coolidge.